Hi, it's Jason here at Fraser Valley Rose Farm, and before we get so busy and deeply into the growing season, let's start off with one resolution. Let's not overwater our plants, but easier said than done if you don't have a feel for it. Oftentimes you will see new gardeners coming up to a plant and you'll see them doing a little pokey test with their finger. Okay, it feels dry at the top, let's throw some water in there. What you'll often see growers doing, and I noticed this when I was in horticulture school, is they'll grab this pot and you see them do a little weigh with their hand like this. They're weighing how much water is in the pot compared to what they have gauged before. So it's a relative measurement. Then you'll see them tip it out of the pot like this and have a look at the soil and roots. What I can see here is, yes, it's a little bit light at the top there. It would feel dry to the touch, but there's still plenty of moisture in the soil profile, and so I don't want to go ahead with watering on this. Let's have a look at some other pots and get a good grasp on when you should water and when you should not. My assortment of plants is limited this time of year, but I was able to pull 5 pots that would approximate 5 different levels of watering. Now, it's not like these levels were handed down from on high. Really, it just makes sense for us to be able to talk about this in the way of a scale. Like, say, the one on the right is a 1, and the one on the far left is a 5, ranging from almost bone dry on the right to completely saturated wet on the left. Now, this is the same scale that horticulturists, that the horticulture industry uses to talk about dryness or wetness in a pot. And in fact, the one on the right should be in full wilt, and the plant isn't quite there yet, but it would be if I don't water it soon. So maybe it's not a true one, but the other ones approximate it. And as I say, the one on the far left is so saturated that if I grabbed it and squeezed it, I would be able to get water out of that. It's just that wet. Now, the funny thing is, people will ask, well, where do I want to target then? And if you were looking at that, people might think, or let's say less experienced growers might think, that you want it full of water, the two on the left. The fact is that your best growth of roots, despite what you see on these plants here, but these are different plants in different stages of growth, but the ones that get the best rooting are the ones that you maintain in the level between 2 and 3. So you actually do want to see some dryness in that soil. You want to see it drying down at the top. You know that when you have a scale of a pot like this, that the bottom soil is going to be wetter than the top soil. So you're going to see dryness at the top, and then you're going to see just a little bit of moisture in the center here of number 3, and that's been holding for some time, and you want to let it go down to here where you can just almost barely not see that moisture. You can feel it by the weight as well. All of your root growth happens when you're in those optimal levels of air versus water. So why can't we just boil this down to a straightforward answer of how often should you water that plant and how much water should you put into the pot? And the answer to that is because there's too many variables. How big is the plant? How big is the pot? That relationship matters an awful lot. What stage of growth is it in, and how well rooted is it? What is the temperature? What is the sunlight? What is the humidity? Is it on the edge of the crop or in the center of the crop? All of these things affect how quickly a plant goes through its moisture, so you just have to check. And I guess I'd use the analogy if you were talking about driving a car and you were asking your mechanic, how often should I put fuel in? They could give you some very broad guess, but your usage would determine everything. And what's more, again, with plants, because you're trying to keep it in a certain range of water, it's like the mechanic trying to say, well, I want you to keep your tank between 30 and 50% full at all times. For that kind of calibration, you're going to have to watch the fuel gauge. It's the same thing with plants. You're going to have to watch how much water is in the pot before you decide what more to put in. Well, that's all well and good, I can hear you saying, for plants in pots and containers and trays where you can easily check by weight or tip them out of the pot. But what about plants in the landscape, for instance, or in larger containers around your patio that are not so easily tipped over? And the answer to that, let me return to this for a second and say, I don't check every container, every pot, every time. I build a history based on the samples that I look at. And once I have a frequency sort of set in my head, twice a week was good last week, then that's my default, and I move up or down from there based on the random checking that I do around the pots. So it would take me forever to water everything if I had to check every pot every time. So you can use a similar kind of methodology when you're talking about plants in large containers or in the ground. I don't think it's the wrong thing to talk about when you're getting in, if you're unfamiliar with the property and you're getting into the warm season, to dig a little hole and check how moist the soil is. Where is that soil moisture can tell you a lot about what your plants need. But the second thing is that you'll note that when I talked about those soil moisture levels, I talked about that when it got down to that 2 and 1 range, that there was some level of plant wilt. Don't be afraid of your plants wilting a little bit. It's one of the signs that you need to calibrate by. And once they're getting down to that wilt, then you can see, okay, now's the time. Now's the time to push back up the water. And then you build that history with what you're seeing on the plants. If they go so far that they're dropping all their leaves due to water stress, yeah, maybe you've gone too far. But a little bit of wilt is not the worst thing. Just as I'm wrapping up here on the topic of watering, let me address a watering myth or two that I think might be instructive. The first one that I've heard is kind of bizarre. What it says is don't water on a sunny day when the droplets of water could sit on those leaves, they'll magnify the rays of the sun and they'll burn your little leaves, they'll burn little holes in your leaves or that kind of thing. And that is pure nonsense. Actually, watering on a sunny or even a breezy day is a really good idea. Do it in the morning. It has time to evaporate that moisture off of the leaves. Any markings you see on leaves from water sitting on there too long is more likely because you watered, say, overnight or in too humid conditions and the water just sat on the leaves for too long, and then bacteria or fungal disease germinated on those leaves and caused that damage. But it is not burning from the sun at all. One other thing I wanted to talk about is the idea that watering from the bottom, using a tray, dunking it in, letting it soak up the water from the bottom, is a better method than watering from the top. It solves one small problem, which is the moisture level of the soil at the surface, which can be detrimental. You can have things like thrips and fungus gnats, particularly in those top surface layers of the soil. If it's too moist, and they'll fly around and they'll breed. So that can be a problem that is addressed to some degree by watering from the bottom. But the thing is, watering in a tray like that, dunking it in, you can actually soak those moisture levels far beyond the 2 or 3 or even the 4 level that I showed in that tray there. They'll end up 5 at the bottom if you soak them for any length of time. I'm not saying it's impossible to do bottom watering well, but it's just as easy to do it poorly. So this is not all solved by watering from the bottom. It is solved by careful attention on your part and knowing and gauging where you want the water levels in that pot. All right, thanks so much for watching today. If you have any questions, please drop those into the comments below the video and I'll see what I can do to help.